folks. We're ready to get going here. This is LoFi 31. We have a wonderful set of presentations. We have two speakers today, so we can get into a community update around the conversations around Sync and Local First and the upcoming Sync conference in SF. I'd like to take a moment to say thank you to our special sponsors across Electric SQL, Jazz Tools, and Zero. Their sponsorship helps make these meetups and our community happen. So first up, we have Tim. I'm excited to hear his talk. He's been around the block. Anything databases, he's going to be our guru for it. I'll definitely be reaching out to you as well. And without further ado, let me switch over to your presentation. All right, here we go.
Excellent. Thanks. Well, hello everybody, and Jons, thank you very much for the opportunity to give you this presentation. Yeah, okay. So we're just going to be using, in fact, Google to do the presentation. But just to sort of introduce things, what this talk's really all about is really trying to make sure that when people do move to sort of local first, or what I call on device, database design is given its appropriate focus, because to be, to make it quite clear, if the database design is optimized for local first, then it's going to be straightforward. If it's not, or if you think you can just port an existing application without necessarily making any changes or thinking, then that's typically where the problems are going to arise. So from my perspective, database design has an outsized impact on local first systems. So just say a little bit more about myself. As Jons politely said, I've been around the block a bit. I am a bit old, but I think it's interesting from my perspective in the fact that I've sort of witnessed the growth and development of databases all the way from the mainframe era with IBM DB2 through client server into SaaS, which in many senses is a sort of almost like a return to the mainframe era, and today now moving to local first. And specifically, my own experience is, I think, like most people, is relatively limited on local first, because in fact we haven't had that long to do it. My own experience has been primarily focused using IndexedDB on the client, and using central coordination systems such as Dynamo, but a different level of complexity compared to the old-fashioned, or I call old-fashioned now, sort of SaaS-based systems on more sort of regular stacks. Now, I'm currently working at Memicule, which is an application platform that's actually, in fact, built absolutely centrally on local first principles. And I will be using a few examples from both a sort of a workflow system and also an accounting system, just to give a little bit of reality to the examples here. Now, in terms of what I'd like to talk through today, I think the first thing is, particularly when you talk to a lot of business people about local first, it can seem a little bit new, a little bit scary because of that. But I think it's important to understand that database distributed data is actually the norm for most businesses. Then I want to talk about some of the sort of history of database design, particularly with normalization, ways in which I think you can work around those issues.
Hey, Tim, sorry, I'm running into some issue. Give me 10 seconds. What I'll do is I'll follow along your presentation with a copy of the deck. It just kept saying streaming error and canceling your presentation. Give me 10 seconds. Yeah, I kept trying to keep it going, but yeah, it's very set on deciding that it's not gonna like me presenting it. Uh, Luckily, you already sent it to me, so I'm pulling that right now. So what I'm going to do is try to present it from the PDF uh, and follow along where you are. I'm trying to trick it into being happy. Somebody pushed an update and it's driving us nuts. All right, page 9 is where you're at. Okay. Yep, I'm matching. Okay. Yeah, I was going to follow whatever you share on the Meet. Just do it manually. I can hear you fine.
perfect. Obviously, logging is, if you like, the classic example. In finance, time series databases with things like tick data, etc. Um, and for the more general sort of business applications, a number of projects. Historically, the Postgres project and the commercialization of that with Illustra, and most recently, if anyone's familiar with Closure, Rich Hickey has also produced something called Datomic. I think I spelled incorrectly there. All of these work on that principle that you don't actually do an actual insert, an actual update onto a database. You just do a sort of an insert with, if you like, a new fact. Now, the good thing about this is that you get incredibly fast update, which is why it's obviously perfect for logging. It also gives you this ability to do what they call is time travel. So you can relatively straightforwardly you can say, well, what was the state of the database 3 weeks ago or yesterday or something like that. And again, depending on the application, that can be useful. However, in practice, these systems have almost never are very rare in their usage, and the reason for that is because they come with some significant costs, which for most general applications are sort of the killer for this. So, because everything has to be essentially figured out at read time, it's slower read because they've basically got to read the entire database and figure out what the latest sort of update is to a certain piece of data. And you also get a maintenance headache with vacuuming because a lot of these, if you like, obsolete rows are still there and they clog everything up. And realistically, you do need to remove them at regular intervals. So those sort of insert-only databases where essentially you're trying to abstract that that logging process from the database designer or the end user, it's not really been a successful approach. So instead, what I think you need to do is, if you like, embrace this idea of what I'm calling facts and actually implement it directly as part of the model. Now, what I mean by this, and maybe the best example of this, and we're onto the, yeah, that's it, yeah. What is the next example of this is maybe something like a CRM system where you have lead status. Is it warm, is it cold, or what have you, something like that. Now, the point about something like lead status is that it's not a thing in the same way that a company name is, or in the same way which a number of employees is. It's not some sort of objective fact that you can count on and you can record and you can treat as being somewhat permanent, or even it changes at least somewhat consistent. It's really an opinion of someone. And the reason why this becomes important is because two key things that come into this are, of course, well, who made that opinion and when was it? So, again, if you look at a job status, it's one thing to say what the status of the job is, but it's actually more interesting to know that that status was set by somebody on a certain date, because then you can use your judgment to know who that person was. Are they kind of qualified to know what the status is? And was it like yesterday when they made that assessment, or was it 2 weeks ago, or whatever? It gives you the ability to know what the value of that data is. And it also then means that effectively, if you're missing any of these facts, it becomes effectively a soft failure, because it's worth, even if you don't know what the up to date status of a job is, knowing what it was yesterday or last week is still actually quite useful. And so this is an approach which, of course, fits very naturally onto a local first architecture, because the only thing you would miss in the event of some sort of message failure is again, just like real life, you essentially have old information, potentially incomplete information, but still useful information. So if we now go and look at derived data, one particular issue with distributed database systems is derived data, or often is trigger-based data, but not necessarily. This is an example from our accounting package, and essentially it's an account. So if you think about accounts in an accounting system, there are things like sales revenue, accounts payable, stuff like that, and they have a number of transactions held against them, and they also have an account balance. So how much is your accounts payable? How much is your accounts receivable? Now, these are always calculated from the actual journal transactions. It's the whole premise of what's called double entry bookkeeping. And they should, in theory, be calculated all the way from the year dot. Of course, that's impractical. So typically, what happens is that they're effectively cached, for want of a better word, for particular time periods. So when accountants say they're going to close the book on October, or they're going to close the book on Q3 or 2025, what they mean is they're basically doing all of those calculations and coming up with the answer. Now, the challenge of this sort of derived data with local first systems is what exactly do you replicate? Because do you replicate the trigger? So in other words, do you simply replicate the base data and rely upon the remote systems to apply their own triggers and calculate the balance correctly? Or do you essentially tell the remote systems to ignore the trigger and to push the actual account balance that was calculated in one place? So the question is, do you serialize account balances or do you not? And where that becomes not an obvious decision is the fact that the account balance becomes a sort of not solely a derived fact, but it becomes a fact in itself, because the account balance is going to be something which gets reported. And so the reported account balance is effectively a fact. So the best way of doing this, even though it does perhaps sound a little bit more complicated, is to actually kind of do both. So you have if you like, the internally calculated account balance per node, and then you would also have the replicated um, reported account balances. So this is the number that got sent to the IRS or to HMRC in the UK, and the two could conceivably be different, but in real life they can and are, and that's why accountants get paid the ridiculous fees that they do, is to sort those problems out. The key thing is that this is not an IT issue. This is an accounting business rules issue that needs to be resolved. Now, I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to skip over this quite briefly, because I think a lot of this is sort of well understood in terms of how does a publish subscribe database or remote database works. The real point of this slide is really just to make the point that on the left hand side here, this is actually a typical sort of arrangement for what I would call, like say an Amazon AWS system with Aurora or something like that. And of course, it's basically doing the replication itself sort of under the covers. It's doing it very quickly, so you may not notice. But there are certain cases where that several second latency time could be an issue. So a publish subscribe database is really just taking that same idea and moving it onto a bigger scale. And I think one thing to bear in mind, again, when we start talking about consistency, is that if you've interacted with large telcos, you may well have had the experience of perhaps updating your address through the telephone system, and then finding it's not been reflected in the web system for a couple of days, stuff like that. I'm based in the UK, and there's to my mind, a ridiculous situation with Barclays, where if you pay your Barclay card through the app, the money disappears on one day, and it's typically like between 6 and 24 hours before the money appears on the credit card statement. So these sort of consistencies aren't necessarily the end of the world, when they're sort of part of the business problem. Now, just moving forward to how that addresses, how you can help to prevent issues with collision avoidance. This is really sort of the premise of conflict-free replicating data types. And the key thing here is to essentially atomize the updates so that they don't
interact and don't overwrite each other. And that does beg the obvious question then. Well, what happens if people are updating the same
Hey,
piece of
Tim,
data?
you can take some of my time. This is some gold content, so feel free to take your time with these.
Oh, okay. Well. Thank you. Well, maybe I'll just say a little bit more about this, about on the collision avoidance thing. Is that you would normally, the normal criticism of of multiple updates is this the ability to overwrite people. But this really only applies if you treat the entire record as a single atomic update, which most relational databases do. That, however, is the wrong approach. The right approach is to basically update only the fields that are being updated. So, and this is essentially the essence of a conflict-free replicating data type. So as you can see here, Bob and Alice can change different fields to the heart's content, and they won't overwrite each other as long as the updates are essentially field level. Now, that does beg the obvious question, well, what happens when they try to update the same field at the same time? And what I would say here is it doesn't matter. And again, this kind of goes back to that very first picture of all the dinosaurs. There is this thing called external reality. So if two people are updating your phone number, they are presumably acting in good faith, and they're presumably trying to update it to the correct new correct phone number. If that's not the question, if that's not the case, if for some reason one of the individuals has got the wrong phone number, then it's irrelevant whether it's a central system or a distributed system, because the person who's got the wrong number, if they update it at the end, that it's still going to be wrong. So this idea about collision avoidance needs to be always framed in the context of, what is the business reality? What is the external reality of this? And if we're back to that previous comment about, for example, lead status, where it's not a phone number, it is something that people have different opinions on, then in that case, we should be thinking about auditing the fact that it was Tim on the 28th of October who said the lead was warm, and actually, maintaining a record of that so people can make a judgment of it. Then I just want to talk about serialization for a moment here, because I think sometimes people can come away with the impression that local first is all or nothing, and I don't think that that's really a sort of an appropriate case. So I think in pretty much any kind of business application, there's always going to be something that requires some degree of serialization. We were talking earlier about jobs, workflows in a system. A good example of that, which in fact we implemented, was unique sequential job number. So there's always going to be some component of good old-fashioned, single central host systems. So it shouldn't necessarily be seen as being a question of all or none. However, it is the case that when you do look at these serialization examples, again, in many cases, you can't really use the innate database functionality. So for example, things like repeatable read are functions that all databases support, but the reality is you can't typically use that level of support. You need to do it inside the application when you're doing things like shopping cart or document management to make that explicit. Almost finished now, but pretty much the last comment I just wanted to make is on the well-known CAP theorem, and again, in comparison to central systems here, I think people often sort of knock distributed systems by saying, well, they can't ever be completely consistent. But I think the reality is even with a central system, you're not going to be completely consistent. Specifically, any kind of business system that involves human beings is going to have mistakes, it's going to have different opinions, and you will never get anything which is more consistent than the actual people who are using it. So again, it's not about being absolutely perfect. It's about basically being consistent with what you can expect from the basis of that. So if I had to sort of summarize that into an easily memorable way to think about what you need to think about for database design, just fart. Basically, think about fact-based updates. With that, audit records. Understand what the read-update balance is in the designing system. Transaction boundaries and derived data. You're probably going to want to have to sort of distribute both, but recognize the differences between both, and summary data. So thank you very much for your time. I did notice a few questions come up, which I didn't have chance to both to read at the same time. So maybe can I look at them now somewhere on the system, or?
Yeah, it should be in the chat. Do you have to run? I remember
No,
you.
no, it's not that. I just okay. No, I can see it, so I can just uh, uh,
So what we
see that.
usually do is run these at the end, but I think you have to
Oh, okay.
leave
Well,
before the end of the call.
right. Um, So there's a question. I just want to address maybe some of the specific
Go for it.
question here. So the question here from Alec, which is that the background info on transactions and consistency is much more complex to maintain than apply the last update to random fields. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, because I mean, yes, but what was the? I guess there was a more specific point you were getting at.
Uh, well, maybe let's continue the conversation, and then you can engage with Alec on the chat. I
Okay.
wanna make sure Paul has enough
So
time, and
can
then
I
circle back.
can I drop the slides into the chat? I guess I
Yeah,
can.
for sure.
Okay. Let me just do that right now, Alec.
All right. Next up, we have uh, Pablo. I'm excited for his talk. He's been around the block. Tim is our database guru. Pablo is our infrastructure and distributed systems guru. And so I'm looking forward to your talk. And he's had like experience at Google. And from for the folks that didn't check out the show Lo-Fi post, looking at CAD in the browser being so performant was one of the reasons I like reached out and asked him to give us a talk. All right, let's go over to you.
Oh, thank you. Let's see. Let me see if I can get presentation working.
Fingers crossed, so I don't have to like do a three
Yes.
deck DJ. All right, your
Is
desktop's
this
coming
coming
in
through?
great. Yep.
Okay, let's try it out. Let me know, is that full screen? Is that okay?
Yep. We're cooking.
Excellent. Hi all, I'm Pablo. I'm here for Builders AI, a small startup working to bring CAD to the browser and offer kind of the modern tech stack and AI integrations. This is the Halloween edition, since somebody made the comment there in the chat. And here's a little screenshot of what we'll get into here on the right. What we've developed is I used to work, at Google for a long time, systems and software engineer for some of the search systems. And before that, I had done startups. And when I wanted to leave Google, I wanted to kind of get back into the startup space, but something away from the mainstream of tech. So I was really interested in engineering disciplines outside of tech. But what was basically missing for kind of the engineering that I thought should be there is everyone was still using desktop CAD applications, and the web-based stacks were kind of SaaS from 10, 15 years ago. So we got a couple guys together and we started developing a CAD engine, which I'll talk a little bit more about, to bring a CAD application into the browser, starting with just the most basic features. We have a React app up at Builders AI. Feel free to go check it out. No login required. But it's really specialized around two formats that are the exchange formats for CAD, professional CAD, which are IFC and STEP, um, and not any proprietary format. So if you have some CAD files from like Revit or SolidWorks, we won't support those, but you can typically export those to IFC or STEP. Those are old formats. IFC is in the STEP family, and the STEP family is an ISO standard that spans all the different industries for building things, cars, planes, boats, gears, machines, circuit boards, and buildings. So what we have worked towards, and we launched earlier this year, and kind of a soft launch. We're mostly working under the hood, and the application you see at Builders AI, like I said, is a React app that's on that. But the whole thing is running in the browser. Once you're up and running, you can almost disconnect from the internet. We're working towards full progressive web app, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we have a CAD engine that is able to load both the geometry and all the metadata from these standard formats in the browser completely locally. And then we have versioning and issue tracking integrated with GitHub. So if you have models that are in IFC or STEP, and we're starting to, it's really IFC to start with. STEP is going live this quarter for larger models, but you can see a demo there of a circuit board. These models are typically not feasible to load in kind of the freebie CAD applications on the web, and they even present challenges for professional desktop-based systems because the existing software companies are really based around more of a proprietary model. So everything we do is open source, open standard. And yeah, if you know how to work your way around Git, you can view your models on there today. And then I'll talk a little bit more about how the engine is structured, but what we're looking for is basically this idea that the interchange is not well addressed between different companies, groups where they need to use some sort of standard. And that often coincides with this idea of keeping your data local. You don't want to do like a heavy buy-in step where you're signing up for a web-based service and it's a startup. Are they going to be around in the future? Or where's your data hosted? I'm in Switzerland right now. I split my time between Austin, Texas and Zurich, Switzerland. And the more open standards approach is actually very alive and well and kind of preferred in the European Union, and also in emerging markets, India, Indonesia, some of our largest user bases. But so you can come and I'll give a demo in a second, maybe soon, but just to give a little bit more context then, this is a snapshot of GitHub about a year ago or so, the different step formats, automotive and aerospace. We do support STL, OBJ, GLTF, and even PDB. We can drop a molecule into our browser. There's mostly on GitHub OBJ files because that overlaps a lot with gaming, but there is definitely growth in the step category. So here's what our app looks like. It's for desktop and mobile, written in React with MUI, and then we use WASM under the hood to support a C++ and TypeScript engine that covers the entire specification for IFC and STEP. The STEP spec is AP214 for anybody who's like more into 3D printing. That's the one that you use for that. And then you load your model in, you click on share, and then you get a nice QR code. So if you're on your phone, this would be packed into that little phone screen. You can try that right now, and it'll bring up the UI state and the model with the camera positioned kind of exactly as seen. Here's kind of a canned demo. Here's the same model. It's a 3D model. We're using Three.js in the middle of the browser. And you can kind of click around on it and the UI jumps around. There's just kind of some demo comments. You can go to the GitHub comments. These are backed by, but really what most people are coming here for is to quickly access a model that they have locally. And so these property sets here on the bottom right, you can a lot of data in here. This is when we talk about these specs, everyone immediately thinks 3D data, and indeed you have to have that to do interesting work. But 90% of the ISO specs for capabilities for doing CAD in the browser. Um, there's the saying at Google, fast is our favorite feature. Browser. Again, the companies in this space all have proprietary formats, which are very performant within their software. But when it comes to whatever the HTML equivalent would be for interchange, they're very poor implementations, and it's talked about widely in the industry. And so that was our first work, was to make sure that the CAD engine itself, completely locally, I'm running on a MacBook Air, and that's what these numbers are from. We can load gigabyte sized building models, step models for the circuit board here in tens of seconds. And this is really even before we've gone to multi-core. We're starting to play with multi-core, and you would expect, yeah, pretty good speed up on these performance figures even here, so that we're loading in 10 seconds ish. What you would get from like Autodesk Viewer is 990 seconds for the same model file. You can't see it very well. I just transcribed these from a black background to white background, but you can see over here on the left, cloud icons. So all the cloud based services, you have two speed problems. One is the upload itself, just to get it up to the SaaS service for large models, is non-trivial. And again, for this crowd, I'm sure we all appreciate the data sovereignty and premise choice concerns about where your data is housed. But even once you start the processing, all of the clocks for this performance comparison are after upload, when the engine on the SaaS platform starts reporting that it's processing. This is how long it takes. A little look into our engine, the way we've built it. The geometry core itself is a separate library called Conway Geom, and that's wrapped in a WASM. The full WASM and TypeScript library is called Conway. So Conway Geom is mostly WASM. It's the bottom of the iceberg. It contains all the geometry core. This is forked from a shared project called WebIFC, started over COVID, but we've substantially rewritten it, a new constructive solid geometry system, and advanced NURBS and BREP. All the kind of more scalable code has been, that's where we spent a lot of our time getting the performance and memory usage down. That forms the geometry core. We have a demo up too for STEP. If you go to our site for Conway or Conway Geom on GitHub, there's a link there that you can test larger STEP models. And we're starting to do many hundreds of megabytes models, which is basically unheard of especially for web-based viewers. But then the IFC, going up the stack of the core there, this is maybe getting into what Tim was just talking about. We'd like to support a multi-user concurrency workflow, where kind of like Google Docs, where you can see your caret moving. So you can be editing different parts of the model, doing transforms with your team. Usually, like Tim said, you're going to be editing attribute data, so there's not a lot of problems of concurrency. But that still requires some sort of a transactional model. We used open operational transform for Google Docs. I think this is going to be more local, and I'll talk a little bit about how we've been playing with Matrix for that. But then you get up to the kind of 3JS layer, which is layer 1 here, and then applications on top of that. And it's the app layer interfacing with these bottom 3 layers, which is our API surface for the AI work that we're doing as well. Let me just check. Was there any comments there?
We'll tackle them at the end. Go ahead.
All good? Yeah, okay. I'll get that at the end maybe. Okay, and so then getting on to AI, roughly this is, these tool bench button bars is where the industry has been at for a long time. Very complex UIs, whereas more modern UI practice is more of a progressive reveal, like video games. You unlock achievements and tools so that it takes time to get into your tool set. And of course, midway along our journey, AI kind of hit finally. I used transforms in 2017 in the natural language group at Google, and I am happy and sad to say, well, I'm sad to say that we all had access to it, but we missed that boat. Um, good job to the OpenAI guys for showing what was possible. But these days, if you wanted to approach the UI problem of how do you engage in a very complex workflow like engineering is, but especially, I guess, within verticals where engineers have a certain discipline, you might want all your buttons up there, and that's kind of how tricked out IDEs look. But especially in a collaborative environment where you're handing roles back and forth, you have multi-function collaboration. You really want a really simple UI, and then you want more of a progressive reveal UI affordances for the user. And that's, I think, where we're going to see UI development go with the AI assistants, and then also application development like a la Bolts or Replit. The assistant stuff we're going to launch here. We have a couple of you can see our polls up on our repo. There's some demos there. I'll give you a little demo of the app creator. It's pre-recorded because we are a real startup with crashing software. But you'll get the idea of what we're doing. So like I said, assistant is one UI affordance that I think is essential. That's going to be the primary interface. But especially for engineering, you can talk to an AI and ask it kind of ephemeral ad hoc queries for your model that you're working on, your project that you're working on. But what you really want is a more oftentimes you'll want to convert that into a reliable application. We had started application development on top of our platform at the beginning of the project a few years ago. And the idea there was to allow an extensible model, especially in a social environment, over Matrix. So if you go to Builders right now and you open the apps panel, you'll just see the events logger. And soon, hopefully, many AI apps. But this little boundary between the app and the apps, our main application and the apps kind of shelf is a iframe and Matrix API boundary. So that you can have your kind of own independent sandbox to launch an app that works on the model. And the API surface to the model is our Conway engine, so the thing that has the 500,000 lines of type-safe code for accessing the data. If anybody's been playing around with AI development in the last year, you've probably heard about Model Context Protocol. You can kind of see where we might go with that. I don't want to talk too much about that architecture because we haven't committed yet, but that's what we're up to on our Discord when you drop by. But the demo itself then is, imagine that you've just dragged your model in. We have a version of Bolt's open source. If you haven't played with it, it's really cool. Single shot app generation. So we have it running inside of Share. This is all local. And then the only thing that's remote here is the AI, but all the model data is kept locally. And we're experimenting with solving very simple what's called takeoffs in the industry. And that's where you want to prepare basically a short report on elements of your project. So give me all the windows from the building and maybe get some specifications for them so that I can generate, bill of materials or something like that. So like I said, you could just ask an assistant for some facts about your model. But for an engineering application, if you want to do this repeatedly or iterate it over all of the elements of a building model or across projects in a consistent way that's reliable and conformant, let's say, to specifications or credentialing that happens in different jurisdictions, you need code. And that's where I think the application creators sub in. So we've just demonstrated here is Bolt running inside of Share. Um, Oops, just came to the end there. Bolt pulls down all the NPMs necessary to build a little React app and gets it running using the API that we've put in as a system prompt. And it turns the query, please, pull all the elements, the window elements out of the building and turn it into an app. That way you can review the code separately. But inevitably, you're going to need a little bit of iteration on that. This query found that there were 259 windows in the building with a total glazing area of 131 square meters. That's correct for the glazing area, but the count is wrong. The reason for that is because there's many parts to an assembly that make a window. The glass is not it. And so demo 2 is picking up where that left off. And so we go back and we ask the model, can you only show the kind of logical windows? And I'll jump ahead a little bit. And so we go forward and it updates the app as you're all familiar with AI coding. It can kind of do simple tasks, analyze the windows, and we get the correct count, 67. And so again, this is a standalone application running inside of an iframe that is then talking over an iframe boundary. And instead of doing post message ourselves on the iframe boundary, we're using Matrix API, anticipating that there will be a bit of a distributed ecosystem of runtimes, and we want to have some flexibility there for where the apps can run and then interact with the model, and hopefully plug in with a kind of an automation channel. So you could watch this from Matrix or Discord and interact using like slash commands with your project. Really breezing through it. This is basically what I just showed you, but given a little bit more substance, this is a bit of vaporware. And then from there, we're going to go, that's what I've just talked through. Assistant codified is having the AI agent write the software for you. Agentic is just a way of saying that once you get to more complex projects, you're going to need something like a cursor agent or a Claude Code, Codex that repeatedly iterates to find the complete solution for the task it's been given. And then once we achieve that, this is basically just par for the course when you come to AI companies at this point. What's new for us is that we're trying to apply this to CAD. And then we want to very much get to a generative CAD, constraint-based, where you say, I'd like to take a draft model and now it's elaborated into more of a construction-ready model. So that's us. There's our QR code. I'll drop these in channel. And thank you. Let me come back for questions then.
Well, that was an awesome presentation, Pablo.
Hey, thank you.
If you stop sharing, I'll continue. But you should also look into the malleable software people too. And this idea of like shipping a builder within an app, like that might just be the future. It's like all software interfaces just have like a little prompt for you to kind of modify it however you want to. That would
Yeah, I
be
think
intriguing.
the way we're thinking about it is you create that app and then you get to create your favorite button or your
Yeah,
favorite toolbar or work with other people in your org to create a toolbar. So
yeah.
it still could get complex, but it allows a much more user-driven approach to creating that functionality.
Yeah, along the same vein, I love that graphics with the toolbar overload and scalable complexity is what I've been calling it, where you try to abstract away the capability of a platform so it doesn't
Mm,
get in the way of new users and getting people to scalably increase their demand. I'm going to
yes.
use that kind of setup. Uh, All right, folks, I'll be honest. If you aren't tired of my face yet, I'm the guy hosting these things. Today, I'm just going to give you a brief update and talk about SyncConf and SF coming November 12th. Uh, First of all, what has changed over the last 2 years? So we all got together for the values-driven kind of orientation of local first. Sync is becoming a popular mainstream concept. Sync app, Aaron has kind of introduced is this idea of apps that are built on top of sync engines, and sync engines are kind of the normal mind sphere right now. The takeaway from these things is that what I'm trying to get to is that Sync is a first party citizen for local first. This is an active decision, and if you want to debate it, we can take it offline and kind of chat about it. But Lo-Fi from the beginning, when we started almost 3 years ago, we've been a big tent kind of community where craftsmen and people who want to learn how to improve their skills kind of gather and have a reason to kind of engage. And 80 to 60% of that has been about how to make your apps faster, how to like run without a black back end. And the connecting tissue for all of us have been the user empowerment that Martin Klebman kind of mentions with the seven ideals of local first. So Sync is a first class citizen in our lo-fi community, if there's ever any ambiguity about that. Our commitment to local first and aspiring to those ideals is by no way diminished by this approach, but we will continue to kind of drive that. I've been very loose on moderation and keeping the general and random and off topic kind of going. And if anybody has comments or like improvement suggestions, please do let me know. The website is going to have another kind of update to kind of make it a little bit more engaging and a source of content. So local first news by the PowerSync guys is going really well. They ship it on time every week. There's a lot of great content that I find from that newsletter and their posts on the general. So in addition to that, we want to make content like videos, conferences, events easily accessible in a sort of my local first feed through the LoFi.so page. So stay tuned on those updates over the next quarters. Uh, how did why are we all here? For me, my personal journey has been like deep frustration about fragmentation and silos, and the fact that users are just like a side product or like somebody that is like pays you and or is like earning you attention economy clicks and someone you don't care to kind of envision as their context. So I'm not just an account on one product. I am a person with many products and many accounts in some of these products. For example, I have something north of 8 Gmail email addresses. And the thing that we need is to take the user centered kind of point of view to say, like, no, we shouldn't blast somebody emails that has 2% conversion rates because we're pissing off 98% of our users, and start thinking about what does it look like for an email to be accessible from my notebook, or like what is a calendar event in terms of an email context and a meeting recording. Everything being disparate and separated is kind of frustrating on the passwords, the friction, and the sort of overall diminished experience that we all have. And protocol builders in the past were really, really great. Imagine if we had a Google Internet or a Microsoft Internet that we had to pick before using it. That would have been the dystopian version, but it's not so far removed from where we're going to today with these behemoths kind of narrowing down and like trying to lock in all your apps and all your kind of needs from one platform. But as we all know, there's always this one thing that they don't do, and that would force you to use a different platform. And this has created sort of the fragmentation and enshittification that drives me nuts today. That signal was in 2019 when the local first paper came out. There have been previous attempts at this, the Solar Protocol in 2014 by Tim Berners-Lee, which then become Inrupt and is still going. We also have Fission Codes, which try to do a pod-based application interrupt, but local first was just an unopinionated, ideals-driven kind of name. Even though when people hear local first, at just the headline level, they assume data locally, and that's all kind of what that local first means. That is not the case. This is a technical keyword that means these 7 ideals, and there's a really long, well-established paper describing what the authors intended with these. And unfortunately for us, while it has gotten us together, it has sort of been burdened by a lot of debate, and we still don't have a lot of sort of solutions. One of the biggest criticisms that comes up is CRDTs are notoriously hard. There's even a whole blog post by Alex saying lies I was told about CRDT. And I really loved Tien's statement where local first is not binary, it's not done or not. There's a spectrum of things that you can do. And sync started emerging as this path to being able to kind of go to local first. So if you already implement a sync platform, it's much easier to go from there to a full local first solution than trying to debate about conflict resolution in the context of user ideals. What I mean by that is build with sync, then go offline first, and then you can add P2P long now kind of solutions where even if your company goes bankrupt or sells out, it doesn't have to shut down. Why sync and why don't we just stay focused on local first? It is sort of an orientation that has come out of the local first movement because number one, we needed a commercially focused on burden tool. So Sync conference coming up in November is all about being able to build instant apps, being able to have optimistic updates, and sort of pushing the envelope on craftsmanship for web apps and product building. And these are just tangible, practical benefits. And there is sort of like clear implementation. I should say clearer in that if you have to rely on fetch and do round trip calls, it will be really hard to call your platform sync. So optimistic updates to the server needs to be able to fetch once and not duplicate query fetches within a reasonable amount of time. And these things already level up a majority, I want to even say 90% of the web products out there, which do repeated page loads. Even if you go forward and backward, you might even go and refetch the same page just because it was easier to implement. And these 3 reasons have kind of made it a lot easier, less burdened, and it has evolved into a more how do I build forward-looking apps kind of story. And Sync Conference is the manifestation of this kind of effort. Me and James from Electric SQL did Sync San Francisco about 8 months ago. We did Sync London about 4 or 5 months ago in July. July was, yeah, about 4 months ago. And now we're doing a full conference in San Francisco. Every one of these have been overwhelmingly sold out. And now we've got about, I think, 40 more tickets left for SyncConf in November. We're in late bird right now. All of this to say is that big tent, we all want these 7 ideals that empower users to have privacy, user ownership, sovereignty, agency, and even fundamentally capitalism without competition is a recipe for disaster. And we need to start taking power away from these giant monoliths to sort of protocol based, connected, user owned things where your data is not locked away and you're not like pinned to Twitter for the rest of your life, but it is portable and interoperable so that you can kind of have many options to compete. So I hope to see you all in SF November 12th. If you haven't got your tickets, get them like right now. And that's it for me.